I'm Julian Barnes. I'm an intelligence reporter at the New York Times. I try to find out what the U.S. government is keeping secret. It takes a lot of time to find people willing to talk about those secrets. It requires talking to a lot of people to make sure that we're not misled and that we give a complete story to our readers. If the New York Times was not reporting these stories, some of them might never come to light. If you want to support this kind of work, you can do that by subscribing to the New York Times.
From the New York Times, it's The Headlines. I'm Tracy Mumford. Today's Thursday, August 22nd. Here's what we're covering.
Your vice presidential candidate said you were contemplating dropping out. Are you?
Thank you, Bobby. Thank you.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s bid for the White House appears to be almost over. The Times has learned that Kennedy is expected to end his presidential campaign this week, and that he's in talks to endorse Donald Trump. His campaign has said that Kennedy will announce his, quote, path forward tomorrow. And 3 people familiar with his plans say that while he could change his mind, discussions are underway for him to appear alongside Trump at a rally in Arizona. Kennedy's exit from the race, less than 3 months before the election, would close out one of the most durable third-party presidential bids in modern American history. Earlier this year, some polls had Kennedy pulling in double-digit support, with the potential to draw a meaningful number of votes away from both Democrats and Republicans. But in recent weeks, his poll numbers have plunged. His campaign has been running out of cash, and his efforts to get on state ballots have been caught up in legal challenges. Meanwhile, in Chicago last night...
You know, you might not know it, but I haven't given a lot of big speeches like this.
Tim Walz officially accepted the Democratic Party's nomination to be the vice presidential candidate. And in the biggest speech of his political career, the Minnesota governor and former congressman reached back into his past and went full high school football coach.
It's the fourth quarter. We're down a field goal, but we're on offense and we've got the ball. We're driving down the field. And boy, do we have the right team.
Democrats are hoping that Walz's Midwestern background, including his love of football and hunting, will help win over white working-class voters, particularly men, who've been turning away from the party in recent years.
We got 76 days. That's nothing. There'll be time to sleep when you're dead. We're going to leave it on the field.
Walz's self-described pep talk was all part of the high-energy lead-up to the convention's main event, Kamala Harris's speech, which she'll give tonight. People close to the campaign tell The Times that Harris feels like this speech is one of the most crucial moments of her campaign. She's been going through her speech line by line with her speechwriter, who used to work for President Obama. And she's practiced the speech, teleprompters included, at least 3 times between other campaign events.
This is not the speech that the vice president anticipated she would be giving just 4 weeks ago. And now she's had to prepare to introduce herself to the broader political world.
Maya King covers the Harris campaign for The Times.
In my reporting, largely talking to party organizers and strategists, one concern that they have expressed is the handful of independent voters and swing voters who might not yet be sold on her. I think both parties recognize that this is an election that will really come down to the margins. And so every vote is going to matter here. And having a message that appeals to the folks who say they don't know her very well quite yet, or just might have some skepticism about how she would govern and what her policy portfolio would be, this is her chance to talk to them as well tonight.
Campaign officials say Harris will try to do 3 main things in her speech: tell the story of her journey from a middle-class background to the vice presidency, frame Donald Trump's campaign as dangerous and backwards-looking, and make an unabashed appeal to patriotism, a theme that has usually been embraced by Republicans. Live coverage of the speech with analysis from Times reporters will be at nytimes.com. On Wednesday, the Labor Department came out with revised numbers for how the job market's been doing, and they show the U.S. economy has added far fewer jobs than previously thought. From last March to this March, The data shows the U.S. added 818,000 fewer jobs than the Labor Department originally reported. Revising the numbers like this happens every year as more detailed data comes in. But this year's revision is unusually large and could be the latest sign of potential weakness in the job market. Still, experts say the update doesn't change the larger economic picture. Job growth is slowing, but not collapsing. And the unemployment rate is rising, but layoffs are still low. Overnight, all freight traffic on Canada's railroads came to a standstill after the country's two main rail companies locked out their employees in a labor dispute. The companies, Canadian National and Canadian Pacific Kansas City, have told 10,000 employees not to show up to work, halting trains and potentially disrupting the supply chain. The companies have been negotiating with the workers since September, and some of the key sticking points have been over scheduling and concerns about fatigue. A union representing the workers accused the companies of pushing changes that would force crews to stay awake longer, threatening derailments and other safety issues. The companies dispute that, saying their proposals do not compromise safety, and one called the union's demands unrealistic. The shutdown could have serious economic consequences. By one estimate, half of all Canadian exports are moved by trains. Timing-wise, it's right at the start of the grain harvest, and farmers may have to stockpile their grain for now. It could also affect major car companies. Honda and Toyota both have big factories in Canada, and those finished vehicles are largely sent to the U.S. on trains, which are now stopped. MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, announced that it's had a sharp decline in racial diversity for its incoming class of freshmen, the first class to be admitted since the Supreme Court banned affirmative action. The court ruled race can no longer be considered during the admissions process, and MIT is the first major university to release its data since then. It shows that the number of students who are Black, Latino, Native American, or Pacific Islander is now 16%, down from about 25% in previous years. Meanwhile, the number of admitted students who are Asian American rose from 40% to 47%. In a statement, MIT's president said the ruling essentially undid decades of work the school had put in to achieve racial and ethnic diversity. But the founder of the group that pushed for the nationwide ban on affirmative action said that every incoming student to MIT will now know, quote, that they were accepted only based on their outstanding academic and extracurricular achievements, not the color of their skin. MIT's results are consistent with what's happened when affirmative action was banned at a state level. Public universities in both California and Michigan saw notable drop-offs in the number of Black students after they could no longer take race under consideration. And finally, The Times has been reporting on how Mennonite communities are expanding in Latin America. The religious communities started moving there about a century ago, and there are now more than 200 settlements in the region, covering almost 10 million acres of land. Some have carved out colonies deep in the Amazon rainforest.
They are defined in a lot of ways by rejecting modern technology and trying to live separate from the rest of the world. But another thing is that land is pretty cheap there, and they don't mind doing the work to clear the forest, and they want to have large tracts of land in order to kind of maintain their lifestyle.
Reporter Mitra Taj traveled by plane, boat, and motorcycle to reach two of the colonies in Peru's part of the Amazon.
When we arrived, it didn't really look like Peru anymore. It was very kind of orderly streets, very square fields, not at all like typical Peruvian farms, which tend to be smaller, kind of big fields that would just run up right into the forest. There's horse-drawn buggies moving around, boys collecting milk and canisters. But there were signs of the Amazon everywhere. The first person we spoke with, the leader of the colony Providencia, had, a parrot in his house that would speak in the German dialect that the Mennonites speak in.
Mitra says that in Peru, there are some tensions around the Mennonites' use of the forest. The government has now opened investigations into the communities for clearing the forest without required permits, something they deny. And environmentalists are also raising concerns that the colonies are damaging the rainforest and exacerbating climate change. The Amazon is already under stress from much larger threats like logging, cattle ranching, and mining.
The Mennonites themselves say they do acknowledge that they cleared forest in order to build their colony, but they look around and they say the forest is big. And they weren't familiar with the term climate change, so they weren't familiar with the role that the trees and keeping the trees standing plays in avoiding worsening climate change. But it will be interesting to see if authorities are able to stop Mennonites from expanding into the forest, to see how quickly and whether or not these Mennonite colonies expand as they have in other countries. These are people that are trying really hard to live apart from the rest of the world, but once a colony is successful enough, rooted enough, it gets big enough for other people in the colonies to want to break off and start a new colony somewhere that's even more remote.
Those are the headlines. Today on The Daily, how a Republican takeover of an obscure election board in Georgia could shape the 2024 election. You can listen on the Times audio app or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Tracy Mumford. We'll be back tomorrow.